All right, we're back for our second session. Why Flutter? We have incredible guests with us today, both of whom were critical for the Flutter journey.
Yeah, so I'd like to start off by introducing Kasper Lund, the co-founder and CEO of Toit. Kasper is the co-creator of Dart, the programming language, the language that powers Flutter, and he's also the co-creator of the V8 JavaScript engine, which powers modern browsers, Node.js, and more. Kasper, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here, and thank you for having me.
Great to have you here, Kasper. We also have another special guest, Tim Sneath. Tim is the director of product for Flutter and Dart at Google. Tim joined Flutter while it was still in its infancy and has been at the helm throughout its incredible growth. Tim, it's an honor to have you here with us. Thanks for joining.
Hi, you guys. It's super to be here. I'm just honored to be able to join you and Kasper and talk a little bit about Flutter and FlutterFlow.
Good to see you again, Tim.
Yeah, you too, Kasper.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, Kasper, let's start with you. Can you tell us about the story leading up to Dart and kind of the motivations behind it?
You want the real story, or do you want the polished one that we usually tell? You probably want the real one, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
I joined Google in 2006 to build the JavaScript engine for this browser that we were doing at Google, Chrome, and that went really, really well. We developed something that was much faster than the competing engines out there, and we had a ton of fun doing it. But at the same time, right, whenever we had to implement functionality described in this JavaScript specification, we got somewhat sentimental and a little bit nauseous because there are so many things that were just really, really incredibly hard to make fast and make robust. And maybe the worst part was really that it was so hard to make performance predictable. So we could make things go really fast in one app, then someone would delete a property of some object somewhere or do eval in an inner loop somewhere, and all my smart optimizations would go nowhere. So it was just so painful to watch us build this, at least what we thought was pretty incredible technology, and see people have a hard time get the most out of it because it was so hard to use right. So we thought about a way to make something that was just much more predictable, much more structured, much better for developers to get that right performance. And it was very performance focused, you could say. And we just found that the confines of JavaScript were just a bit too much for us. And we did so well with the JavaScript stuff that Google as a company were willing to say, well, why don't you just go build something even better? And we did with that. So that was the reason we decided to sort of go into that. It was really, essentially, if you've watched the Destroy All Software WAT speech by Gary Bernard, where he shows some of the warts of JavaScript, that's the reason why we did that. It was just incredible to see what happens if you get a little bit simpler system, right? And we wanted to have a simpler system to hack on.
Yeah. Did you at the time kind of imagine what, so you weren't really building it with kind of UI in mind, and it was really just to kind of have a faster version.
Yeah, we wanted to essentially try to see if we can make something as an alternative for JavaScript in the browser. Now that's super hard, right? You need to convince all the other vendors that it's a good idea. That's terribly difficult, and we didn't succeed with that. We spent a lot of time on optimizing Dart compiled to JavaScript, which I think you guys are still benefiting a lot from in the Flutter and the FlutterFlow world. So maybe that was the best thing that could happen, right? That we sort of got some resistance on that part, found a good way to target the modern web without fundamentally changing it. And then at the same time, it allowed us to build a virtual machine, a Dart implementation that was just much more predictable performance-wise and much faster on mobile phones, which turned out to be a sweet spot for Dart, I would say. So we had hopes for being a UI language all along, but it sort of took some cool innovations on other fronts to make it happen.
Yes, and it's just definitely code we've been writing a lot of the last several years, and we definitely love the language. So
yeah,
safe to say it worked out really well.
It really did. It's actually quite a joy to pick up. It's very fast. It has all the benefits of a typed language, but also all of the, nice tactical sugar of JavaScript and other languages too. So, yeah.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. So I guess this next question is for Tim. So Tim, I know you had a long and successful career at Microsoft before this. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and also what motivated you to join Flutter so early, which was arguably a gamble at the time?
Yeah, sure. Well, I spent about 17 years at Microsoft working mostly on developer technologies. I used to do a lot of developer relations kind of roles at Microsoft. I joined back when Windows XP was still the current version, and kind of followed through from what was originally Longhorn. I came to the States in 2004 to work on this sort of fledgling sort of Longhorn project, which was an attempt to redefine the Windows UI. That was part of it. There was this thing called Avalon that became WPF, that was really trying to redefine and modernize how Windows presented pixels on the screen using hardware acceleration, using managed code. And had a fantastic, Microsoft's a fantastic employer, very technically smart, understand the importance of developers. But yeah, I kind of got this sort of call a little bit out of the blue from Google, telling me about this sort of project that they were sort of looking for a product manager for. And there was this thing called Dart that I knew of only because of, as Kasper sort of said, like the sort of almost the sort of the non-successful attempt to bring it to replace JavaScript at the time, and Flutter that I'd never heard of, despite spending all my time in the UI world. So it was kind of, I sort of started just sort of delving in and seeing, well, what is all this about? And like I think almost everybody else maybe on this call, I kind of fell in love. I love how clean and thoughtful Dart is as a language, how tastefully designed it is. And Flutter really grabbed my attention as an attempt at this space that so many have tried before and made valiant efforts at, but also failed at, of building a UI toolkit that can deliver both the cross-platform kind of side of the world, but also delivering this high-quality, beautiful, rich, native kind of performance and quality. And those two things have been like, one of those sort of like holy grails for, I guess, UI. It's kind of crazy, right? To date, there's no easy way to build an app that goes everywhere. I mean, there's the web, which is fantastic, but let's be honest. I mean, just between ourselves, as it were, the web is started off as a document markup language, right? HTML stands for hypertext markup language. It was never intended to be the substrate for applications, and so you kind of get all these layers upon HTML and JavaScript and the DOM and everything else that are trying to sort of like take this fantastic transport layer and build an application platform on top of it. So you have that sort of side of the world, and then you have all these sort of like native platform-specific toolkits that are fantastic in terms of performance, optimized for an individual platform, but just not capable of delivering that productivity side of things. So you wind up with people building the same app 4 times, 5 times over, exactly the same app. And we have that too at Google, right? You look at almost every product that we ship, it's available on multiple platforms. And so teams wind up rebuilding those same kind of things. So my arrival at Google was part of, my own sort of bet on that there was a better way. And I thought, well, we'll try, or we'll go down in flames trying. And so far, the flames haven't overcome us yet. So let's put it that way.
Yeah. And this seems like an effort that, even going back to Java, originally, designed to run on any machine. I think Flash arguably is also trying to kind of do a similar thing, but those hadn't worked. And was it the fact that it compiles too? I guess it's a leading question. So what were some of the things that kind of convinced you, it could happen? I mean, that, did you think it was different this time? And well, what was the reason?
I mean, I think there are a couple of things that still hold true, actually. I mean, number one, there are very few companies that actually have the resources and willpower and tenacity to do something like this, right? I mean, it's sort of very difficult to build, because essentially what you're doing is you're owning that abstraction on behalf of everybody else. So instead of everybody building 6 times for 6 platforms, you're taking that burden on as a platform provider. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, the quality has always been the thing that's suffered, right? It's always been that compromise, and you either get cross-platform or you get performance. And I think the thing that sort of stood out for me from Flutter was seeing some of those, and also seeing some of those early wins. Like Hamilton was one of the very first apps that was sort of released for Flutter when it was still in that sort of like technical preview alpha phase, and some of the early progenitors of Flutter and Dart, folk like Kasper and others that sort of were made this product successful long before I joined, set the seeds for its success. And I think I can take little credit for anything other than watering those seeds, because it's the engineering quality of those early decisions, the as we sometimes describe it, the technical envelope of which Flutter and Dart were built, that has kind of created the foundations for its success.
Yeah, and actually we want to show, I think this is a good time to show a chart we grabbed from Stack Overflow trends. Let's see if you can put up on the screen. This is just to show the growth and success Flutter has had in the last 5 years, basically essentially since launching.
Looks beautiful. Up and to the right, I'm pretty sure.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, so
yeah, I think we may be covering it, but yeah, the general
Yeah.
trend is Flutter up to the right, other things down. Take our word for it. But it's
actually, Stack Overflow questions is one trend, right? But I mean, so you could take that and read it in a lot of different lights, right? It could mean that lots of questions isn't necessarily a good thing,
true.
but there are other sort of metrics or trend lines that I think we're really excited by. There's, I don't know, something like 600,000 apps today shipped using Flutter and Dart on the Play Store and the Apple Store. And we can only track a fraction of the apps. Obviously, we can't track desktop apps or web apps in the same way, because there's not necessarily a store to put them in. But we see that sort of kind of crazy growth, and it's very humbling from our point of view, of course, because we're just trying to build our little sort of thing in the bowels of Mountain View and Denmark and a couple of other locations. But it's just, yeah, the growth is certainly pronounced.
Someone asked they really want to see this chart, so I'm just going to share my screen here.
Nice.
Just to put it up there.
I want to see them too. Yeah.
There we go. Can you see it now?
There you are.
There we are. Yeah, at the very least, even if it's people asking questions, at least it shows that they care. May not be the ideal metric, but it shows some amount of care.
Yeah, and the very first sort of like spike you see there in 2018 was when we started with the beta for Flutter. That was the 1.0 beta, and that was sort of like the beginning, really.
And I have, I guess, one other question for you, Kasper. So one of the common questions that we get from developers, especially ones that don't have a lot of familiarity with Dart and come from like a JavaScript background, like what are the important differences between JavaScript and Dart, and what is, in your view, like the main benefits of using Dart?
Maybe I sort of gave a little bit of the answer to that question away before, but I think it's a very good question. Like, what's really the difference here? I mean, when you look at it from a language perspective, it is a lot about, I think, predictability and being able to reason about code that tends to grow over time. And with JavaScript, we just found it incredibly hard from the implementation side to reason about the code we were supposed to run. But it's certainly also true for developers that the flexibility you get from a language like JavaScript, where you can delete local variables introduced with eval, and I mean, there are so many things you can do that are just kind of insane. And the thing is, you will end up using some of those by importing that next smart framework. And when you sit in there try to debug your app and try to figure out what's happening. That's the point in time when you realize that if you had a simpler, if you will, language, a smaller, more well-defined language with a semantics that was clearer, it would have helped you. And I think it's sort of a slightly theoretical answer in the sense that there's no good reason to discuss languages at that level. It's much better to just dive in there and try it out. And we just find that people that use Dart, even if they usually are JavaScript developers initially, they end up appreciating some of the structured features over time, and the kind of growth of that ecosystem on Pop and other places also demonstrates that these things tend to combine really well together. So like the composability of things, the way nicely structured, well-defined code sort of just fits together is a huge win over time for an ecosystem. So it's maybe a little bit less about core syntax and a lot about sort of how non-surprises over time just really help you.
Yeah.
In your code and in the code that you depend on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what we found as well.
Yes. Okay. So one question, and kind of you're also starting to see in the comments. So both of you, saw FlutterFlow relatively early. We're still very small, and we just would love to hear what was your first impressions when you kind of found out about FlutterFlow or saw what it could do? Maybe I'll start with you, Tim.
Yeah, I'm seeing these sort of questions about sort of maybe we can have more FlutterFlow and less Flutter. I love that because that shows that you're building and adding value to Flutter. Look, I mean, what we provide is the technical baseline, the sort of like the substrate, if you like, on which FlutterFlow is built. But it's just super to see that FlutterFlow is taking advantage of what Flutter has. The two go very well together, right? Because if you have a good platform, you can build amazing apps. And so, what the reason I'm here in support of FlutterFlow is because I see this tool as being a fantastic step forward for developers that want and creators, not even necessarily developers, who want to build experiences that don't require you to be a sort of a deep sort of like coder to have to sort of like deal with all the aspects of application development. And FlutterFlow is really nicely built as a kind of a layer that understands what it's built on, and also abstracts and provides sort of like tooling that helps real world developers and users build apps using it. So that's what I like about it. It's a really straightforward, easy to use tool that can generate some really powerful results. And the fact that it's built on Flutter is a win-win from my sort of slightly selfish perspective as the person who's responsible for Flutter. It means that there are more Flutter apps out there, but also it shows that there are others who are building value on top of the platform, and that is likely to lead to long-term success. So, when folks say I'm not a coder, I'm focusing on business processes and things like that, that's exactly what FlutterFlow brings. It brings the power of this really rich, deep platform to everybody, and it democratizes access to that platform.
Is anything you want to add to that, Kasper? Or I do have a fun question I want to switch gears to.
Yeah, so I'll just add that, like, for me, having lived through lots of both browser and programming language wars, there's something really neat about seeing people benefit from complex language work without having to worry about it. So just when I saw FlutterFlow and saw what it offered people a chance to use, like those people that sort of benefited from the get-go from this technology didn't really care about JavaScript or Dart or anything. They just wanted to put together a beautiful app in no time, right? And I think that's really, really powerful. So maybe it just takes a little bit of the focus away from that, like language level and all this stuff, right? And just focuses on what really matters to most people, building beautiful apps.
Yeah, and that was the motivation for us from the very beginning, was so that you can focus on the product and the problems you're solving directly. Hopefully, we can present the abstractions at a higher level enough, higher enough level that you can be very productive. And for slightly switching gears, I want to ask about what were the first ever applications you ever built? So first ever visual applications you built. What language did you use? What IDEs? Do you remember? And
You want to start, Tim, or should I?
You go for it.
Okay, it's pretty weird. So I built an advanced visual editor for colored petrinets, which is the weirdest kind of thing in the world. Sort of an advanced state machine-y thingy, and we wanted to build a UI tool that allowed people to edit those complex graphs and nets using both a mouse in the dominant hand and a trackball in the non-dominant hand on Windows, where we had to like jump in at the driver level to make like two mouse cursors appear at the same time, and that was fun. And we decided to build it in a language nobody has heard of. It's called Beta. It's invented here in Aarhus, where I live in Denmark, and it has a non-searchable name, so you can't find anything about Beta, of course. But that combination was just a lot of fun, right? So sitting close to the compiler team that did this, and then building this visual tool for a formal modeling language called colored petrinets was like the first sort of real thing I built.
That's cool. For me, I mean, gosh, I mean, I've been, I'm starting to get old. I'm starting to realize that I used to be a young guy, now not one of the young guys, but I started programming on a ZX Spectrum, which for those of you who kind of grew up in Europe or you may be familiar with, is an old school sort of 8-bit microcomputer, and it was super easy to get started with, right? I mean, in the 80s, to actually have a device like that was really, really great. More recently, I think, well, going forward, in the 90s, the thing that was amazing was Visual Basic, right? There were lots of people who programmed with Visual Basic because it made it easy to create UI. You could just take a button from a toolbox and drag it on the screen, and you had a button. And you wanted to have something happen, you just double-clicked on the button, and you wrote what happens at that point. And that was like the 90s. 30 years on, we haven't seen anything quite like that, I think. Lots of things have kind of made some forward progress, but have actually also regressed in some ways. And again, that's what I love about FlutterFlow. So one of the things I tried when I first got my hands on FlutterFlow was recreating an app that I built when I first joined the Flutter team, which was a dad jokes app. And my goal was to just take this app and to see if I could build the same thing in FlutterFlow without writing a line of code. This app, it basically is, you're just calling off a web service. So there's a web service that just spits out jokes. I'm not writing the jokes themselves. I'm just calling into this web service. And it's just an app that sort of displays these things. And I kind of built it both to learn Flutter and also to impress my teenage kids. And so that was sort of my app. And and I was really impressed that I could actually recreate the app with almost no issues on FlutterFlow. I was expecting to hit some kind of bar pretty early on, and that was going to be my feedback to Abel and Alex. But I was disappointed in a way that I couldn't give them that sort of constructive feedback because it kind of just worked.
Yeah, but as I recall, you definitely still had some great things to say that we definitely learned from. And but obviously, as you can tell from the rest of this conference, we were very, very happy about the dad jokes app because we clearly have an appreciation for that. So that was something we'd love to see.
Yeah. So we're kind of getting to the end of the session here. So let's use the next 5 to 10 minutes for maybe questions from the audience.
Also waiting on questions. Kasper, have you written any app with FlutterFlow?
I have only worked at the sort of the slightly more technical level with Alex and Al when they actually visit us here in Denmark. So I've been sort of investing my time at the lower level, as I usually do, like hiding below the surface. I always end up doing that. I'm not quite sure. I write too few apps.
Yeah. I saw a question. Is it possible to import UI from Figma? I think it has come up a couple of times. maybe we can start with that. It's a FlutterFlow question. It's definitely something we've, there's already a package. There's a Flutter package that imports from Figma. We wanted something we've thought about from the very beginning. I think we're getting closer now. The only constraint is we want to make sure that we import it in a way that it's responsive, that the code works the way you want it. It's not just arbitrarily positioned on the screen, in absolute positioning, so that as the form factor changes, your layouts adapt as well. That's why we've kind of been taking our time to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have some, especially developers have some like almost PTSD about tools that take design and go to code, because generally they make very, very poor code. And so that's something that we're excited to do, and in an intelligent way. And Figma actually has some support for this too. So I'm very excited about getting to that.
This is a great question. So maybe I can give it a go. Maybe Tim or Kasper, if you guys have an opinion here. So I think the direction. So we're very, very early, but I believe the direction we're headed, I think, is going to be the future of app development, in the sense that being able for a team to collaboratively work on the graphical part of the application, connecting it to different data sources, adding logic, all of these things being very efficient, and working with higher level abstractions, while you also have the ability to work with any custom code that you may have to write, with a very strong ecosystem of plugins and available code, such as PubDev provides a lot of, I think there's over 15,000, maybe 20,000 by now, packages that are available, that even higher, that integrate with all sorts of, that provide a lot of functionality. And I believe that kind of direction is where we're headed, where you can build applications really quickly by plugging and putting pieces together for building apps much faster than previously done. And we're not saying we're the ones who make it happen. We think we have a strong shot, so we're going to keep working at it, but that's the direction that I believe it will head. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about the direction that you all are taking with FlutterFlow, it feels very aligned to me with some of the investments that we've historically sort of made. Right, there's a talk that our technical lead gave, called the mahogany staircase, and the idea of this is essentially that you build layers, right? And so what you need is a really good, it's like when you build a house, right? You need a foundation, you need a slab that you can build on that is going to sort of endure. And that's kind of, if you like, the Dart runtime and Flutter, and then you kind of build things like widgets, and then you build sort of like animations and cool graphics and things like that. And then FlutterFlow is really kind of the next sort of tier up. Like, how do you take all of those lower level investments and build higher and higher primitives on top of that? It's crazy that today, if you want to build, for example, a login for your app, you typically are building text boxes for usernames and passwords and buttons that handle the sign-in process. And then you have to implement like a forgotten password flow and a flow for like different sort of sign-ins, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft. Like all of that stuff you can abstract once you kind of grab layers and layers upon that, and it just becomes easier and easier to build an app. So I believe that the future is more and more of those pre-built parts and tools that allow you to assemble those things, so that when I'm thinking about an app, I should think about, okay, I need login, I need profile management, I need a shopping cart, I need a catalog, I need all these different pieces, and I should be able to just assemble those rather than having to essentially define them from first principles. And I think FlutterFlow is an important step towards that.
Yeah, that's definitely how we think about it as well. And I love this analogy of the mahogany staircase too, because we've always said that FlutterFlow is definitely standing on the shoulders of giants, and yeah, that's very true. And I guess we have two of these giants here today, but yeah.
I think one small comment there is, I think it also really matters how you stand on top of these giants. I think if you find a way where it fits natural with the layers below, not just using it and hiding it away, then I think the story really fits together. Like we've seen people build abstractions that are somewhat detached or even sort of fighting the underlying mechanisms. And that usually ends up in a lot of complexity and something where you can just tell that the things are not well aligned all the way through. So you sort of have to have something from the core, the language, the foundational frameworks, everything all the way up to the sort of the low-code, no-code tools that fit together. And I think that's where FlutterFlow really shines, right? That there's a reason why you haven't just called it App Builder 2.0, right? It's very well aligned with Flutter. And I think that really gives it a lot of strength and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So those abstractions, that's the way we should go, definitely.
Totally.
Great.
All right. So yeah, we're over a couple of minutes now. We should wrap up. Tim, Kasper, thank you so much for joining us today. It was definitely such a real pleasure to have you and an honor. Thanks for joining us and chatting with us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, congratulations on your success so far. I think, again, you've got a lot of potential ahead. And to those who are listening in, this is an amazing tool to try and check out.
Great. All right.
Well said.
Thank you so much, y'all.
Bye.